Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this month's Grow Your Law Firm webinar on selling the value of your services. My name's Matt Sleater. I'm the lawyer's accountant. We're part of FWO Chartered Accountants who specialises in working with lawyers and legal firms to help you achieve your goals. Today, we're going to be spending some time just delving a little bit deeper into the processes and procedures and focuses that you need to have in your practice on driving improvement in your revenue via the implementation of strong sales systems. So the area we're focusing on as part of your financially well-organised strategy is that of your business plan. So the better you increase your revenues, the more profitability and cash flow generally you should produce, which ultimately you can then either take that as dividends, reinvest it back into your business, or retire debt. So jumping straight into it. I often hear sales as being defined as the exchange of goods and services for money. Makes sense. Somebody has a need, you can fill that need, they pay you money for the goods or services you provide. What I'd like to do is maybe just challenge that slightly because I've got a bit of a different definition of what I see sales as, and particularly from a professional services perspective. Because sales is often viewed as a bit of a dirty word. People don't like to refer to what they do as sales. So, for those of you who are listening in today, who are principals of firms, or you're an employed solicitor in a firm and you've got a required budget that you need to meet for hitting your revenue targets for the years. Fundamentally, you're salespeople. As professional services practitioners, I think we like to think that we're a little bit different, but fundamentally we're not. We make our revenue by signing clients up to buy our services. That's sales. So my definition of sales is a little bit different. I see sales as the process and skill of aligning the client's value with the services you provide. Sales in a professional services context is a little bit, well, it's not a little bit different. It's quite different to buying a telephone or the latest version of an iPad, or purchasing a car. Usually the services are required by a client because there is a real emotional need for them. Professional services that are provided by professional services firms are very much driven from that personal need perspective by a client. It's often not anything to do with discretionary income, a discretionary spend of their income. It's not like saying I need to go and buy myself a new set of glasses, or sunglasses, simply because I don't like the look of my old ones anymore. Usually there is a specific need that's got an emotional connection with why they're wanting to buy your services. If you're a personal injuries firm, then there's been an injury. Somebody is looking for compensation. If you're in a litigation-based firm, then there's been a perception of wrongdoing by one party to another that needs to be resolved. So there's a whole lot of emotion, and when clients make a decision that they want to purchase from a professional, they have got a value that they attach to the outcome that you're looking to produce. So what happens in most firms is they don't necessarily spend a great deal of time upskilling themselves in terms of what they should be doing from a sales perspective. And worst of all, they don't then build a process in their practice to drive predictability around revenue outcomes. So when I look at sales, I break it down into those two areas. It's really looking at your business and saying, well, what are the processes and skills that we need to have in-house? And then what we need to do is we need to align those processes and skills with the client's value so that it maximizes the opportunity or the predictability of producing the revenue outcomes we're looking for. So two separate areas, process and skill, alignment of client value and your services. So we're going to spend a little bit of time now just looking into each of these different areas. So I'd like to just provide a bit of context with this. The first thing is, as a professional, to generate revenue, take the view that you need to be a salesperson. And I'm not talking about slipping on a set of white shoes and a gold chain. I'm talking about understanding what the process of sales is and what it means. And generally, people feel very uneasy about having to launch into education and learning around sales. So I've just put a little diagram on the screen here just to give some context to how people learn, and this is really where you need to start with in terms of understanding what you need to do from a sales perspective to increase your skills and to create process. So first of all, we start off and we're regarded as being unconsciously incompetent. And by that I mean you don't know what you don't know. A good example is when you're a young child, you haven't got a clue how to drive a car, and you don't really think about it because your parents drive you everywhere. So you're unconsciously incompetent. Then what you do is you become aware that you don't know how to drive a car. So you become consciously incompetent. So you don't know what you don't know. Sorry, you know what you don't know. So you then start taking some lessons, and you go through a process. You become consciously competent. So you know what you know, meaning that you'll stop and you'll go through and run through things in your head around a process. So when you hop in the car, you put your seatbelt on, you put the key in the ignition, adjust the mirrors and so on. But after a while, the more and more you do that, the more and more you practice it, you become unconsciously competent. You just do it. It becomes natural. So the key to understanding a sales process is to learn the basics of it, is to recognize that you're probably consciously incompetent at sales now. That sounds a bit harsh, but it just means that often you'll be a bit tentative towards driving sales activity, and because you don't really know too much about it. But at the end of the day, if you generate revenue in your business, you actually are creating sales. So you need to then move to consciously competent. You need to then create processes and generate new learnings around your deficiencies in your skills so that you can become consciously competent and practice and practice and practice so that it becomes second nature to you. So we're going to cover off a little bit of that today. We're going to look at what some of those key areas are that you need to be focusing on in sales, particularly around some skills and particularly around processes, and more importantly, giving you a little bit of an insight into how you unlock from clients what their value is. So process. Step one, why do we need a process? Well, the reason we have any process is to minimize risk. And when I talk about minimizing risk in a legal firm environment, we have many processes. We have processes for our legal work. If you're going to prepare a will, there's a process. You need to meet with the client, run through what their objectives are. You need to you need to tick the I's and cross the T's in terms of what that document needs to be. There's specific timing that needs to be met in terms of litigation. There's a whole process that you go through that most of you will have documented, And the better your documentation is, the better the process is, the less risk you have. You have processes for how you manage your trust accounts. You have policies and procedures around employment. So every process in your business is designed to minimise risk. So I ask, why not sales? Why don't you have a process in your business to minimise the risk of sale around sales? And when we look at it from a risk minimisation perspective, the real risk you have of that you're looking to minimise is you're minimising the risk of not generating the levels of revenue that you should be. You're minimising the risk of uh, of not converting those opportunities that exist. So what a process does from a sales perspective, it ensures that the sales activities are done in the same way generally each time, so that you've got a predictable outcome that you can ensure you're going to achieve the levels of revenue that you need to. So it's creating a process. So a simple process. So for those of you who attended last month's webinar, you'll be familiar with this little diagram that I've got here. It's just an example of a process that that can be used in a legal firm, and for that matter, any professional services firm. So it's a step-by-step process that you might look at running through to maximise the opportunity of converting an inquiry into a sale. So first of all, it's an inquiry comes in, and that might be, say, in relation to a conveyance. And when that inquiry comes in, there's a process that gets initiated, and so there may be a piece of content that gets emailed out to that inquiry, and a meeting is booked in. So the purpose of the inquiry is to get a meeting to have with that particular client, whether it's on the phone or whether it's face to face. But the purpose of that first step is to get that inquiry converted to a meeting, and you send them some content so that they've got another touch point with you. At that meeting, it's your initial sales meeting. Ultimately, you want to get to a point where you've got very clear understanding of what those clients' objectives are, what their measures are, and their value is. I'm going to come back to that a little bit later on. At that meeting, you're looking to set up another meeting once you're clear on that, so that you can put together what I call an implementation plan. You might call it a proposal, but it might also have a cost agreement attached to it. So the purpose of that meeting is to get a clear understanding of what you're looking to achieve with that client. You may be able to sign them up at that meeting, but you may not. You may need to go away and consider what they need to be doing. You might then send them some content on the way through. So there's another touch point, a summary of that initial meeting, just some notes that you've got. You then present an implementation plan and cost agreement at that meeting. If a client signs it there and then after you've offered them to seek some advice on it, which you need to do, all well and good. But if not, you need to then make sure you've scheduled in another meeting to close that sale, whether or not that's done online, whether or not that's done via a phone call, however you do it. But you need to do that, and you may in the process then answer some queries and objections. So basically, what you need to do is you create a process. I've just given you that as an example, but if you then create a process that you follow, that you've tried and that you've tested, that you can determine maximises the likelihood of that sale being made and that client signing up, then what you must do is you must follow that every time. And for those of you who listened into last month's webinar, the most important thing that you do as part of any sales process is understand that it's just step by step. What most people do, they rush to get from inquiry to close. But what you've got to do, you've got to give your clients an experience and take them through a process. And only at the point in time when you know that that client's ready to buy, and as in a position where they want to sign a cost agreement with you, it's only at that point in time where you really should be presenting your implementation plan. Um, so it's just a process. You've got to step them through until you get to that point. And you might have been wondering, what does BAM-FAM mean? So it just means book a meeting from a meeting. So each step that you need to do with a client along that sales process is to progress them through a sales cycle. So you need to make sure that at every point you are progressing them by booking a meeting from your meeting to get to close the sale. So the purpose of of the inquiry conversation is to book a meeting. So that from that inquiry, you've booked a meeting from that meeting so that you've got an initial sales meeting with them. From that meeting, you're booking a meeting to present an implementation plan, and then you're booking another meeting, even if it's just saying a phone call 2 days later, to close that sale if it isn't closed at that time. BAM-FAM, it's the thing you need to remember every time you're having a sales meeting. How do I progress them through? So the sales process is going to be different each time, depending on with your relationship with a client. So if you've got a good, strong relationship with a client, you may be able to get them signed up and close that sale in one step. The client's made an inquiry. This is what we need to do. This is what the next step is. Yep, sign up. Away you go. If it's a new client, then you may have to spend a little bit more time building relationship and getting to know them and understanding them a lot more before you can actually close that sale. So depending on the area of law that you're working in, that sales process might be different as well. You've got to think about that. So if you're a low dollar value, high volume business, then because of the low dollar value, you've got to shorten that sales process to the shortest possible time, because if it's for a $700 or $800 or $900 transaction, you can't spend a lot of time engaging that client. You've got to make sure that all of your activities around how that client comes to make the inquiry means that they're well qualified and you're maximising your opportunity to convert. So it depends on the type of transaction. If it's a transaction that's for a personal injuries matter, then that transaction is going to be a completely different process for conversion than it is to a corporate advice transaction. So you've got to think about the type of transaction and work out what that best process is for you. And you also got to think about the stage of the buying process that the client's in. There was a consultant out of the US, a fellow by the name of Alan Wise, Weiss. He's written a number of books. I would strongly recommend, if you're interested in sales, then read some of his books or go to his website and have a look at some of his information. But in one of his DVDs that I'd listened to, or CDs that I'd listened to, he says that when you're selling professional services, always ask this question to yourself when a client comes to you or a prospect comes to you: why me and why now? So if you ask yourself that question, then and you find an answer for that in engaging with that client, you'll become very clear very quickly at what stage that client is in the buying process. So if the client is very early on in the buying process, then what you need to do is you've got to be patient with that client. But if they're ready to sign up now, and you're asking, why me, why now, why is it so urgent right now, then you've got to go with that and close. And the client's actually giving you a buying cue to say, sell me this now, let's get started. So take it, close it, move on. So your sales process has got to think of all of those different types of things. So conducting a sales meeting. So if we think about it, you've got this process that you've created, and now you're sitting down with a client and you've got to take them through a sales meeting. So this is when we're talking about skills. So some of the skills that you need to learn is how to conduct a meeting, how to conduct a sales meeting. But I want to emphasize that a sales meeting with a client is just a normal meeting. It's part of a process that you go through with the client so that you can sign them up. It's just normal. You've got to actually do it so that you can appropriately engage that client. So just think of it like a normal meeting, but it's just the first one in the steps to getting them signed up. So the first thing you need to think about from a sales perspective with a client, it's the client's agenda, it's not yours. Okay? Make sure you allocate enough time for a client to so that you've got time to spend with them to find out what they want you to be doing for them. The fact is that they've contacted you is actually a buying signal in itself to say, I want to buy from you. As to how well qualified that client or prospect is will depend on how strong your marketing activities have been and how well that's qualified them along that pipeline process. But what you've got to remember is that the client has contacted you. They are saying to you there and then, I want to buy from you. So if they're saying to you that to you, it's their agenda. They need to articulate to you what they want to cover off with you. So from a professional services perspective, this starting point is the starting point that you should have with every sales meeting with a client. And even if it's not a sales meeting, even if it's just a meeting where you're delivering some advice to a client, start every meeting with this. So ask the client, what would you like to cover off in today's meeting? By asking them that question, what it does, it empowers the client. It puts the client back in charge. What we tend to do when we have a meeting with a client, and look, as accountants, we do this exactly the same way that lawyers do it. We start telling clients. We start telling them what they need to know. Instead, what we need to do is we need to create a space for the client so they can get off their chest and get it all out there, what it is that they want us to help them out with. So ask them. Write down some bullet points. Create an agenda. But go in there with a blank sheet of paper with no preconceived ideas around what the client needs or what the client wants. Ask them, and all of a sudden, you've got a whole list of things that you may be able to then start ticking off for that client and working with them on. So, question number one. So there's three things you need to know in any sales meeting. Ultimately, you need to know what the client's objectives are, you need to know what their measures are, and you need to know what the value is. Okay, so when I talk about objectives, it's the client's objectives. So the three killer sales questions that you need to ask to unlock that is, what do you want to achieve? So that outlines for you exactly what the client wants you to be helping them with, what their outcomes are that they want to achieve. It's not you telling them this is what you need and this is what you've got to do. Ask them what they want to achieve. Get them to articulate their objectives. Okay, so step one, what do you want to achieve? And ask if they struggle with really articulating them, ask them more questions. So get them to build some more depth around what those objectives are. Secondly, you need to get a clear understanding of how the client will know they've achieved those objectives. So how will you know you've achieved it? So what you're doing there is with the client is you're saying, first of all, tell me what you want to achieve, and then tell me how you know you've achieved it. And what that then provides you with is time frames and specific expectations of clients around what it is that they want you to actually be doing for them. It actually highlights for them, it highlights for you, and gets by getting them to articulate that time frame and getting them to articulate what those outcomes are. What it does, it creates for you your scope of works effectively. And lastly, if you want to achieve your outcomes, what will it mean to you? Okay, so this is your question to the client. And this by itself is the most important question that you need to ask. Simply because it doesn't matter what you think it's worth. When we're talking about sales, we're talking about that process, remember, from an inquiry through to closing it. And a client will only will only buy from you if there is alignment between the services that you provide and the value of the outcome to them. Not the price that you're going to charge them. It's not about your fees. What it's about is it's about the value that the client applies or places on the outcome that they obtain. So what we do is we tend to get lost in the fees. We tend to say, well, it's worth X dollars. It's worth $10,000 to give you that advice. Well, it's not. What it's worth is the achievement of those objectives. That's the value that the client places on it. So you need to get an understanding of that. So how do you do that? You need to ask questions that are open. You need to ask how, what, and why style questions, not questions that give a yes and no answer. So if you give a yes and no answer, if you ask a question that's closed, that gives yes or no, it doesn't create any conversation. What you've got to do is you've got to engage your clients around conversation. You've got to get extracted out of them everything that you need to know. So you've got to keep asking them questions until you fully understand. So let's take this through. You might say, tell me what you'd like to get out of today's meeting. Look, we're just concerned about our employment contracts at the moment, so we really need to get some advice on employment contracts. So write that down as an agenda. So tell me, what is it that's your main concern with your employment contracts that you've currently got? Or why is this such a pressing issue for you at the moment? Or, so asking those questions for a client then gets them to talk more. The more they talk, the more that they'll be engaged, the more secrets they'll let out of their bag that you'll be able to utilize as part of your sales process. So asking questions. And this last point that's on this screen is probably the key piece that most people steer away from, but it's the most powerful piece in any sales process. And that is, it's okay to get emotional. I said very early on that purchasing professional services is an emotional decision. Every purchase has an element of emotion in it, but usually professional services has got some personal, significant outcome that is totally driven by emotion. That is the reason why that client's come to you. So ask them questions. Ask them questions like, so how do you feel about that? So if you could achieve those outcomes, how would that make you feel? Ask feelings type questions. Get emotional, because the more emotional a client gets, the more you know that you're hitting their truth. If they're not emotional, then you're probably not really getting to the heart of the issue with them. So get emotional. Ask open questions. So the important thing as part of your sales, so your biggest skill that you can learn is to listen. So the best salespeople are very good listeners. And they listen with two things. They listen with their ears and their eyes. So that might sound a little bit strange about using your eyes, but by watching what people do, it supports the truth in what you're hearing. So if you see somebody that's really getting emotional, and their tears welling up in their eyes around what they're saying, then by listening intently, then you're getting to the heart of the issue, and that's got to be an important issue that you solve. If you're listening and you see their behaviour, their body language is not aligned to what they're saying, so they might be when they're talking about something that might be the heart of the issue, but they can't have eye contact with you. That might be a little bit of a trigger, or they're twitching in their seat. that might be a little bit of a trigger that, look, really they're not telling you the truth at this point in time. So the biggest key to sales is listening. Listen with your ears and listen with your eyes. I often remember saying to my kids when they were younger, and look, sometimes I say it to my teenage kids now, we don't listen with our mouths. So zip it. Being quiet is the best thing. You need to actually, have a conversation with them, but the more talking that a client can do, and the smaller amount of talking that you do, the easier it is to manage a client through a sales process. The easier it is to get to your truth. So listen with your ears and your eyes, but close your trap. So let's talk about value now. So just spent a very short time there on giving you an insight into creating a process that you follow so that you can measure the outcomes and predict with some more certainty. Just giving you a little bit of insight into some of the sales skills that you need to be learning about and educating yourself. Read books. There's a great book written by a fellow by the name of Jeffrey J. Fox called The Secrets of the Great Rainmakers. One of the books that I've read on sales, that is, I actually listened to the audio book. I didn't read it, and just some really great insights and tips that you can take away and start using in your practice straight away with some of the secrets that really great salespeople have used to continue to convert good quality sales targets. But ultimately, it comes down to value. And if a client hasn't got an alignment between the value that they place on the outcomes that are being achieved, a sale is going to be hard. What you think it's worth is irrelevant. It doesn't matter whether or not a client doesn't matter if you time cost a particular matter out at $10,000 or at $8,000. If the client doesn't see value in the outcome that is produced for them, not necessarily by you, but the outcome that they produce, then sales is going to be hard. So your key is getting alignment between the value or the price of your services that you provide and the value that the client attributes to the outcome. So the client's perception of value, it's the client's perception of the value if they achieve their objectives. Don't focus on price. Every client has got money. The challenge that you have in a sales process is how to work out how to get that money out of their pocket and into yours. So that's where a sales process comes in. But unless the client's perception of the value that they achieve by achieving their objectives aligns to the price that you're going to charge them, they won't do it. So, for example, if the outcome for a particular client is that they are going to get a $100,000 settlement, and to do that work, they need to pay you $70,000. The client's going to look at it and say, "Well, really, for 30 grand, is it really worth it?" Where they might say, "Well, $20,000 is okay," but for somebody who that $100,000 is 10% of their net worth, somebody is going to compared to somebody who that might be 50% of their net worth, they're going to have a completely different perception on the value of that outcome. So the point being here that what you perceive the value to be is irrelevant. It really just comes down to what the client perceives as their value. So a low client value will generally mean a low price expectation, and a high client value will be a higher price expectation. So don't take no personally from a client. Often if it's a no, it'll just be because their perception of the value of the outcome to themselves doesn't match, is lower than the price that they're applying to that value. So don't get too caught up in that. Whenever you can, dollarize the value to a client. Ultimately, it can be this can be a link to their price. So for a client, where a potential loss by not implementing a particular action that you're suggesting, if that produces $1 million loss, then if they don't do it, then you know, a fee of $70,000 or $100,000 might be a fee that a client's prepared to pay because they can see that it's going to cost them $1 million if they don't do it. Whereas if you don't dollarize that loss value to a client, then it's going to make it more difficult for them to actually align the price. So whilst it's very important to ensure that you get a clear understanding of the value of the outcome that a client has, by dollarizing that value to a client, it really adds to the simplicity of your sales process to aligning the client's value to your price. So that might be things like potential losses, the dollar at risk, or dollars of possible recovery. So wherever you can, dollarize that. If it's a conveyance, for example, you know the risk of not doing particular searches might mean that it costs $100,000 of additional building work that's got to be done because the plans hadn't been previously approved on a renovation or something. But it's important to be able to dollarize that. And when you come to putting your implementation plan to your clients, once you know what their value is and what their objectives are, then give them options. So just like when you're running a sales meeting, you don't have to give them a yes/no answer. Yes/no question, so that they can either buy or not buy. Give them options. Leave them in control, so that they're able to say, look, what suits me best now is option 2 or option 3 or option 1. So if you can do that, it maximises the opportunity for a client to say, yes, I will buy from you. So it's like when you're talking with a prospective client and you were to say to them, look, we need to schedule in a meeting. I'm available Tuesday at 4 o'clock, Wednesday at 3 o'clock, or Friday at 1 o'clock. Which out of those times best suits you? Oh, well, option 2 suits me. Wednesday suits me. But if you were to say to a client, would you like to have a meeting? It creates the opportunity for them to say no, which makes it very difficult to keep that sales cycle going. So same when you're looking at closing a deal. If you've got a number of options for a client to choose from, it keeps them empowered in terms of their buying decision, but it also keeps them in control of what they're wanting to engage you to do. But mind you, each and every option must meet the client's objectives, and it must be priced according to the client's value. So, for example, option 1 might be a letter of advice to a client. Option 2 might be option 1 plus a legal document, so a contract. Option 3 might be option 2 plus you facilitate the transaction. So you can see that in that simple example, that each option makes it easier for the client to achieve their objectives in terms of the services that you provide. But in terms of each option, it adds more value and therefore must increase in price. So just think of that in terms of your process. If you can build in offering options to clients so that they're in charge of what they're wanting you to do, mind you, option 1 will still help them achieve their objectives, but it might be from a bit more of what I call self-help. I'll give you the advice, go off and do it. Then by doing that, you are minimizing the risk of the client saying no. You're maximizing the opportunity for a client to say yes. So that's really all I wanted to run through today, to give you a very quick insight into some of the things that you need to be thinking about when it comes to sales. And really, it's a matter of creating a process that you follow each and every time, just like your legal work. It's a matter of increasing your skills. So spend time increasing your skills. Remember, if you don't sign a client up to do the work, then you can't do the work. So it's just as important, if not more important, from a profitability perspective, um, your sales process. It's just as important as your production and delivery work that you're doing in terms of delivering your legal services. But do that. Understand what the client's value is. Provide them with options and make sure you align the work that you're doing with that client's value. So as always with my webinars, a very simple offer for the first 15 to email today that would like to book in a 45-minute free one-on-one session. We just do that online via GoToMeeting, and we can just have a conversation about your firm strategy and anything in particular you like. But specifically, if you'd like to discuss what your firm's sales strategy is, very keen to do that. And so the first 15 to email me at matt@fwo.net.au, we can get those meetings scheduled in. For those of you, I know we've got some Grow Your Law Firm, we've got some first timers here on our webinar today. But we've also got a number of people who are regular listeners to our webinar. So I'd like to invite you all to register for our next webinar, the Grow Your Law Firm webinar, which is scheduled in for Wednesday, the 17th of July at 12 noon. In that webinar, we're going to be looking at the efficiency factor. And what that is going to just provide you with some tools that you can use to go and assess how efficient your firm is, and it's getting an understanding of the difference between capacity and revenue. And what I've identified in working with many law firms and other professional services firms is that by focusing on the strategies of charging hours and making sure you've got enough employees there to do the work, often the relationship between the cost of that labour and the capacity that labour can actually produce is quite different to the level of revenue generated. And that's where the biggest leakage of profitability is in nearly every single legal firm. So we're going to spend a little bit of time exploring that and deepening your understanding of the efficiency factor in your practice. So just go on to register at financiallywellorganised.com. On the homepage, there's a Grow Your Law Firm webinar, or go into the events drop down and register for the webinar through the link there. Also, just a quick overview of some of the additional services that we provide. We provide annual fixed fee annual accounting services to all of our clients, which is paid over 12 months in instalments throughout the year, which covers off all of your compliance and accounting needs, so that you can simply build that into your cash flow without getting big licks of bills from your accountants. Also, please go and register on our website, financiallywellorganised.com, for the FWI Legal Firm membership. It's a free membership, but provides you with a bi-monthly e-zine, early bird registrations for webinars, personalised invitations to other workshops, and other benefits, including unlimited telephone calls and email contacts with us if there's anything you need to know. Also, if you're interested in growing your firm and working with other like-minded legal practitioners, we run the FWO Growth Club, which is a 12-month program where you'll meet with up to 9 other like-minded firms who are working on strategies focusing on improving your profitability and cash flow. So just register your interest at financiallywellorganised.com, or call me or email me at matt@fwo.net.au. And lastly, the next dates for FWO Growth Club. We've got an August Growth Club happening in Sydney starting in late August. So if you're New South Wales, please register your interest and we'll be in touch. And also our next Brisbane FWO Growth Club commencing in November this year. So just email me at matt@fwo.net.au. So thank you very much for your attendance today. You should be able to hop online now and register for the next month's webinar. Thanks for joining me. If you would like to catch up and talk about your practice, please just drop me an email at matt@fwo.net.au, and we'll schedule in free 45-minute session. So thank you, and talk to you next month.